Hello guys, it's Chamas. I'm here doing another Beyblade discussion. This time I'm talking about Beyblade Burst Superking gimmicks. So with the sparking system, gimmicks were very odd. So the reason for this is because with sparking you now had the chassis system. Some of these were normal if they were single chassis, it's just kind of a new style of layer. But with double chassis, they actually take the place of discs as well, which makes this a very weird line. So starting out here with Super Hyperion, you don't really have any gimmicks on Hyperion. It's just kind of a bay that exists. It's kind of a good sample for the start of sparking, I guess, but that's really all it does. However, its counterpart does have a bit more to it. That being King Helios. So King Helios does have the one balanced chassis, also of course the King ring, and basically chassis can take advantage of being a certain orientation. So in this case, King is an odd-sided ring, being 5 sides, and well, one balance is also 5-sided, so you could change the orientation. So in this mode, we kind of have its more attack-oriented mode, where these sort of protrusions are paired with these ones. However, you can actually change this. So now, they're offset, so you have kind of this 10-bladed mode, which is meant to make the bay more defensive. It's a pretty simple gimmick, but when you have all of these odd-sided chassis and rings, it does actually have an impact. And yeah, you could also just market that as a mode change, because why not? CX really should have taken some cues here by having it be 2-sided rather than 3, because you get a lot of extra customization here. Makes a lot more sense. And again, it's just a very lazy but effective way to incorporate mode changes into bays. Now Glide Ragnarok is another weird case because this bay has stamina wings. The past couple Ragnarok's have had stamina wings, so this is kind of just its gimmick now. It's not an interesting gimmick, it's just a very basic stamina gimmick. It's supposed to give better airflow for better stamina, but the weird thing is, the previous two had 2 stamina wings, and Crash had metal stamina wings. So now we're going back to plastic, but also it's now 3-sided for 3 of them. I don't know if they just wanted to give Ragnarok a new identity, which then changed back with Cyclone, or they just didn't really have an idea for larger stamina wings yet, like we saw in Cyclone, and having 2 stamina wings of this kind of size wouldn't really be great. It would take up far too little of the layer, and yeah, in that case it does make sense to have 3, but it is still just a weird design choice, but beyond that, it's a really basic gimmick. Now we get to Brave Valkyrie. Brave Valkyrie incorporates a lot of rubber. All of the yellow on the Brave ring is rubber. It's a fairly hard rubber, but it is rubber. But then this red here is rubber. It's a little softer though. But yeah, you have a lot of kind of rubber contact points for the attack points, which is fine. It's not a crazy gimmick, but I don't think Valkyrie necessarily needs to be crazy, so I think Brave Valkyrie is fine. However, because you can change orientations, you can change the mode here technically. So this is the 3-bladed mode, but you can change it to a 6-bladed mode. Now these are offset, so these contact points kind of just do their own thing, and then you have these ones that are again offset, so it is an interesting idea. I don't think this is really the most effective thing, but again, it's something you can do just because of how these are oriented, which is, again, just a nice extra feature to have. Next is Curse Satan. So Curse Satan also brings back kind of an older basic gimmick from Christ Satan, that being the rollers. Now on Christ, these were actually a bit smaller and a little bit less exposed as well. And there's also only 3 of them, now we have 5. Again, I think this is a similar case to Glide Ragnarok, where basically the rollers would have just been too small otherwise, so they had to make more of them, so we have 5 instead of 3. I don't think these are the most effective, unfortunately. I think they maybe should have gone crazier with them, maybe include like a little bearing in them, make the outer parts rubber, and then make them bigger. That could have been interesting. At their size, they just kind of have a little bit of deflection capability, I guess, but I don't really think it's enough. But it's a decent idea. It was nice to see rollers back with Satan, so I guess that's cool, but I would have really liked to see either a better version of Curse Satan, or maybe just a DB Satan that does a lot more than we got here. But as is, it's just kind of okay. Now we have Mirage Fafnir. Mirage Fafnir is a Fafnir, so you have rubber on the outside, since its whole thing is being a left spin stealer basically. And you have a lot of rubber on Mirage Fafnir, and for the first time ever, yeah, the entire sort of outer part is now just rubber. I guess except for these little pieces of plastic that kind of just stick out a little bit, but beyond that, yeah, this is just rubber, so that's cool. Obviously this would be expanded upon with Vanish, but for now, that was a solid way to evolve Fafnir. But also, the double chassis to stamina does have an impact as well. So in its current mode, it is sort of in its just normal stamina mode, where these 3 protrusions do kind of just pair with the main contact points, but this can be changed. As 2 Stamina's design does allow for sort of a counter mode, where these parts are now more exposed, so instead of putting on the rubber, now you just have these larger plastic protrusions here, which does make it a fairly unique bay, I think, and I do like that this does exist. Would have been kind of cool if Vanish did incorporate something like this to represent this new sort of feature, but I get why they didn't. It is sort of a weird design choice for Fafnir, but again, it does still work fairly well. It does give Fafnir something else, which I think is nice after, you know, Geist had something. I don't think Wizard really had enough, so it's something else for Fafnir to do. Now for Rage Longinus, this thing, of course, its whole thing is just being a crazy attack type. Has a lot of upper attack. The Rage Ring, of course, does have these 2 points here, which do have metal, which, I mean, that's just extra metal for the lair. And when you pair that with 3 attack, this thing has a wild upper attack. Starts all the way down here, got metal there, goes up into the ring with more metal, and yeah, you can just tell that is a massive, going from here to like here. Obviously, you're probably not going to be hitting up here much, but still, it is just a wild sort of gimmick to have on this thing. Really, really interesting. It's nothing crazy, but again, Longinus doesn't really need to be crazy. You just want some extra metal and crazy upper attack, and yeah, you definitely do get that here. Now we, of course, get to variant Lucifer. This thing is just weird because, well, first up, you don't have a chip core. Instead, you just have kind of this extra metal here. That's cool. But of course, the main draw is with 2 defense, where you have these 6 rubber blades. They all can kind of just come down. And they have this sort of barrier effect where all 6 of them, when spinning, make this weird rubber barrier. In terms of effectiveness, it's not really ideal, but it was definitely very interesting. Certainly one of the most striking gimmicks we've ever seen in Beyblade, ever in my opinion. When the thing spins and you just have that giant sort of wall of pink, it does look interesting. So even though it's not a great gimmick to battle with, I still do like a lot just for how unique and cool it was. Also, now we have kind of an oddball, which is First Uranus. So this thing was just sort of like a special release, but it doesn't really have any notable gimmicks, although the manga combo does use 1 defense, which is what I have on it. But there is an anime combo that uses 2 defense, however that 2 defense doesn't have the rubber, so it's just kind of a wall-like chassis. It doesn't really have any gimmicks either way. It's just sort of a prototype Lucifer with some references to Hyperion and Helios as well, so that's really all it is. Here are some infamous bays, Death Diablos and Abyss Diablos. These are kind of known for just not being that good. So they both have the same chips, neither one has a chip core, they have these kind of metal points inside, and are also LR. So yeah, you can have a chip core because you need that LR functionality, which makes sense. That's cool. The problem is they just have single chassis that don't really do anything, and their actual rings do nothing as well. Death and Abyss are just right and left spinning rings. There's nothing notable about them at all. Would have been cool if they at least did like a flippable blade, but nope, it's just one's right, one's left. That's all. There's also like this underneath part where you can see like these purple translucent parts underneath the rings. It could have been cool if these were like swappable or something. Maybe have different modes in that case, but nothing like that even, so these bays really just do absolutely nothing. Now we get to Tempest Dragon. So Tempest Dragon does at least have a gimmick. It's a downgrade from Imperial, but it's not bad. So basically these parts are kind of bound. They can move a bit, which is fine. I mean, Sting was bound, you had a bound part on Imperial, so that works. However, if it comes all the way out, and then this part moves up, now it locks it in place. So now you have sort of this awakened mode, where you have larger protrusions, which is there. Tempest is always just kind of used as like a stamina ring. So you didn't actually want this to happen during battle, but with how they marketed it, this was supposed to be like the better attack mode, which again, it really wasn't, but it's something. It's not that interesting of a gimmick, but at least they tried, I guess. Obviously we weren't getting Imperial Dragon 2, that thing was just too crazy, so since it's not the main focus anymore, they had a downgrade, and I think this is at least an okay way to do it, so I'm not overly upset by this sort of redesign of Dragon. Next is World Spriggan. So World Spriggan, definitely a strange Spriggan, also very underwhelming in my opinion after Lord Spriggan, which just had like everything ever. So this one, like Diablos, you had metal in the center of the chip, with no chip core because it is LR, so you need the functionality for that. The World Ring does have a gimmick of sorts. When you push these parts in, they basically act as burst stoppers, so that's cool. And then 2 balance, just kind of locked right now, so it doesn't do anything, but that's all there really is for now. So that's pretty underwhelming, but of course it is Spriggan, so you can change the spin direction. And this time they incorporated the flippable gimmick. So yeah, Spriggan just straight up stole Diablos' whole gimmick, and Diablos now just has like nothing, which unfortunate, but it does help Spriggan, I guess. And also 2 balance does have a mode change as well, which is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and check that out. Now looking at the left spin mode, while it does look a lot different, it still has the same basic functions, and being as round as it is, it's kind of just similar in general, just opposite spin. You do still have these kind of wings that do help, you know, be burst stoppers, so that's cool. However, we now have a different mode for the chassis. And that is, of course, to be able to just have this sort of free spin kind of going on. So that's pretty cool. Now, I should mention that is independent of the spin direction. You could have right spin with free spin, left spin with a stationary chassis. That's independent, but I figured when I'm changing those, I should just do, you know, both at the same time. Yeah, World Spriggan, while it does feel like a downgrade in some ways, I do like the chassis functionality. I do like that you get to pick between stationary and free spin. That's cool. So overall, it does have some cool ideas, but I just don't think it really builds on Lord Spriggan as well as I would hope. It's kind of like Chozy Spriggan in that sense, where I feel like it's kind of cool in some sense, but also not as good in others, so it is what it is. Now for Infinite Achilles, this is a very strange one because, well, it doesn't look very good. This is its balance mode, where it doesn't do much at all. It just has kind of these vague contact points that kind of attack, but they're not great. Also just kind of small. It is worth noting that one balance is 5-sided, as I mentioned before, and, well, Achilles here, with Infinite, is 2-sided. So there are different modes, technically, based on how you have one balance oriented, but because of how the shapes pair, there's really no discernible difference. It's just worth noting. But the real gimmicks come from the sub-rings that you can get, as there are 2 of them. So let's go ahead and check those out. So first up we have what is kind of considered its primary sub-ring, as that's what it comes with. That is Infinite Sword. Infinite Sword, aside from just making Infinite feel like a more complete ring, also kind of is meant to exaggerate the contact points a bit, make it more attack-oriented. It doesn't really do a great job at this, unfortunately. I wish they would have maybe gone a bit crazier, maybe even added a bit of metal on the inside of the sub-ring to give it extra weight. That could have been cool, but as is, it's fine, but we do have another one to check out. And here we have the Infinite Shield. Now, unfortunately, this was a random booster prize bay. The prize random booster level 22, and in order to get the Infinite Shield, you had to buy more random boosters, because you had an Infinite Achilles recolor with this piece as the secondary prize. Also, the prizes were rated to be 1 out of 12 instead of 1 out of 8, so that's just fun. But yeah, the whole thing here is that the Infinite Shield kind of subdues the contact points. It makes them softer, effectively, to make it a more round ring for defense. I remember this being like a decent thing for stamina defense stuff, but it was never great. Again, I don't think they really went quite far enough. It's still a little bit too jagged. Not bad, though. Maybe could have added a little bit of rubber on here somewhere. Maybe have a couple points of that on kind of these sore areas, and that could have been cool. But as is, I think Infinite Achilles is an interesting idea. The balance mode is pretty terrible, but the idea of choosing between 2 different sub-rings for more attack or more defense, I do like it. And I feel like this could have been expanded upon in a much better way than what we actually got with Zest Achilles, but I do like what they did here. I like how they expanded on Union Achilles, again giving 2 different sub-rings instead of just, you know, 1. Still could have been better. The bay as a whole could have been better because I don't like the parts here much, but I think the overall gimmick of Infinite Achilles was a decent idea, so I don't really mind it too much. So now let's actually shift gears into the Limit Break bays. There are 3 of these. This is kind of the subsystem of Beyblade Burst Superking. So our first bay here is, of course, Hyperion Burn. So with Limit Break bays, they were a bit different, as you just kind of had a Limit Break ring, and then also, of course, just the driver, but, you know. Limit Break rings would kind of decide on when the Limit Break would happen, but this isn't really a video on discs at all. I'm just going on layer gimmicks, but it is worth noting as you can kind of choose when these activate based on the disc you have. Now, the Limit Break rings themselves are kind of similar to bases from GT a bit, where it's effectively a mix of a ring and a chassis. So now you just kind of have chips and I guess chip cores on their own. Very much feels like the base weight fusions we saw there, but anyway. Hyperion 2 does have metal on it, and you also have metal chip core, so I guess that's pretty cool. But the main gimmick of Burn is that when you hit the Limit Break ability, these 4 blades all just pop out, which is really cool, actually. I like this gimmick a lot. It takes from things kind of like Beat a Culkin, for example. After 2 clicks, you get 2 points that pop out. This is like that, but with 4, and just even crazier because these are really big. But there is a massive problem, and that is that these don't lock. Once they click, it's just a click. They move out. There's nothing actually locking these in place. So they are subject to just kind of go inward. Also, there were some burst-lock issues with this layer, but that's not really the gimmick's fault. But yeah, the gimmick wasn't really well designed. If there was a gimmick that kind of kept these locked out, this is a very interesting design. I like it because, again, it's like Beat Culkin, but more expanded upon. This design is very much flawed, so unfortunately, it is a very cool idea, but it is kneecapped by its execution. Now for Hyperion's counterpart, we of course have Helios Volcano. So Helios Volcano, like Hyperion Burn, does have metal on the chip, and then also a metal chip core. As for its limit break ability, it kind of pulls from King Helios. It starts off in this 5-bladed version here. You kind of see the underneath part of the layer pairing with the top part, but once it limit breaks, this will change, as then it does shift. So now these red parts are much more exposed, and it's also offset, kind of making it more defensive, so that works. It's not as flashy or as interesting as Burn, but I do think it's generally more effective since the gimmick, functions. It's also kind of cool that it just kind of rotates the way it does. I guess you could argue that's like a deflection ability as well. It's not bad, but for a limit break for a whole subsystem, I don't think this is the most interesting thing they could have done, but it's still at least decent. Now, Lucifer the End. This is where we have something kind of cool. So first up, the Lucifer chip has quite a bit of metal and there is no chip core. Instead, there is a bit of rubber underneath, which is meant to kind of give it a little bit extra burst resistance. But as for the end, the limit break ability, once it does happen, so you have this, of course, like giant wall, these parts are going to press in a little bit, but the limit break kind of just drops everything down, and I just bursted it as I did that, but anyway. See, all this just drops down, and this part just now fully free spins, but also this part also free spins, so you have the center part, and then 2 parts that can spin independently. It's a very interesting mix of stuff. Again though, having the outer part free spinning, I don't know if it's necessarily enough for a limit break, which, again, this is what we have as our subsystem. Remember last year was the infinite lock system, the power core system. Does this really match up to that? I'm not sure, but hey, at the very least, it is cool, so I'm not quite sure if something like Lucifer the End, which is probably the most interesting of the limit break bays, is quite as interesting as something like the infinite lock system or even the power core system, but it's still pretty solid. Then we get to Hollow Death Scyther, so kind of shifting back to the regular Sparking bays. Hollow Death Scyther's whole thing is being unbalanced. You have this giant metal sword, and then underneath on the hollow ring here, there is some metal here, but it is still shifted towards the side of the scythe. And then 4 attack is a single chassis, but it does have a mode change. So you can see right here how there's like these thinner parts and these larger parts. These kind of signify weight. The thinner part is a lighter side, the larger part is a heavier side. In this mode, Hollow Death Scyther is somewhat balanced. It's still a little bit shifted toward the scythe, but it's not that bad. However, we can of course change that. So now the heavier side is paired with the scythe, which is designed to make this very much unbalanced. All the weight is kind of shifted towards the main sort of contact point here, which is pretty interesting. I do like the idea here. I don't know how interesting this is. Maybe they could have gone a bit further. I mean, Killer Death Scyther had a moving part on the scythe, maybe had something moving here, maybe some kind of metal slider even. But as is, it's still decent. Just nothing that crazy, but I don't mind it too much here. Now, Jet Wyvern is honestly shockingly intricate. So you do have rubber on the outside here of the ring, which is interesting for a right spin defense type, but what's weirder is that it has sort of this ratchet function, pulling from the ratchet disc in Beyblade Burst GT that was on Wizard Fafnir. So what this does is, against same spin opponents, it does kind of parry them. It's not like proper free spin, but it does have this function. But against left spin opponents, so opposite spin, you don't do that. It sort of locks. I mean, yeah, you can. If it like goes up or down, it can push, but still. Generally, it doesn't do that as easily, and it's meant to absorb impact. So I do like what they try to do here with Jet. Now, after Tornado Wyvern, I think it would have been cooler if the outside was just full free spin and that was all there was to it, but if they don't want to do that, if they wanted to leave that too loose for the end, I guess, for whatever reason, this is a solid way to evolve it, because you still sort of have that free spin-like effect against same set opponents, but hey, against opposite spin, you can technically spin steal, you could say. It's not a bad idea, and as a gimmick, I actually do like what they did with Jet Wyvern. Honestly, a really cool bay. I would like to see an evolution of this. Of course, my main issue with the bay does come from, you know, its driver, but this video is not about drivers, so I do like the layer here. Really should have gotten an evolution, same with Death Scyther, honestly, but as is, it was actually a pretty interesting bay. And finally, we have Death Solomon. So, of course, this is Solomon's full release after his release as a rare bay gift battle prize layer from, you know, Brave Solomon, but as much as I like the aesthetic of this bay, it doesn't make much sense. So Death, as is pretty uninteresting, but Solomon does have metal. That's cool. This would have been a great time to give us a metal chip core, have like a really heavy chip, could market it that way. Also would be a very accessible way to get a metal chip core, not, you know, through events or a really big set, but nope, not here, I guess. The other baffling decision made for Death Solomon is 2 balance. So for some reason, 2 balance, they opted to just have it on a ring that is locked. So yeah, you cannot change 2 balance's mode. It is permanently fixed in its locked position. Why they didn't give this to a ring that is locked in free spin or just allows you to choose, I don't know. But it does feel like a waste of a double chassis choice, I'm not gonna lie. So I do like that they gave us Solomon, and honestly that's what the booster is really for. It's just to get a cheap Solomon, so you don't get, you know, Brave Solomon. But they could have designed this layer a bit better. But anyways, that's really it for this video. I just want to talk about Sparking Gimmicks, and I feel like they're very strange because there's a lot of cool ideas here. Some things are actually just cool, like I really do like Variant Lucifer and the Barrier, but I feel like there's a lot of gimmicks here that are just not that crazy, especially when compared to like GT or even like Beyblade Burst God. Like I like things like, you know, Death Scyther or Valkyrie, but they're not that crazy. You don't really have a lot of crazy gimmicks here, like Spriggan feels pretty stripped back. The limit break system doesn't really have that much going for it. I mean, I like something like Wyvern, that's pretty cool, but Sparking just handled gimmicks really awkwardly in my opinion. It felt like it wanted to do more than GT, but also didn't really do more and was just kind of in this weird spot where it does more in some instances, but otherwise, a lot of the times it just doesn't. I feel like double chassis were a massive waste of potential. There should have been more of these. Like, you had things like 2 balance and 2 defense that did things. But then there's things like, you know, 2 attack, 2 stamina, 3 attack, which kind of do things, but not as much. And then, yeah, 1 attack and 1 balance are just kind of there. I don't know why there weren't more of these on more bays. You could have gotten a lot crazier. It would have been really cool. I guess you could argue this is, you know, 2020 and we kind of had a bigger problem in the world than Beyblade Burst Sparking's design, but anyway. It's possible that there were bigger plans for the season that just did not come to fruition because of that, but it's hard to say. I wouldn't entirely go against this theory either because it does feel like they wanted to do more here but just didn't, so as is, it does feel like a pretty awkward line, but it's not bad. I had to talk about it even though I feel like it isn't the most interesting line to talk about because yeah, the gimmicks are just awkward, but next time for the final part of this weird sub-series of discussions will be DB/BU, and that will be a wild time, so stay tuned for that probably next month. But anyways, that's all to say here, so thanks for watching and bye bye.